Welcome to Brookline Booksmith's Author Event Series. My name is Megan. I'm the event director here. Tonight it is my pleasure to introduce Eric Larocca in conversation with Paul Tremblay and Christopher Golden. Let's give them a little round of applause. Notes to get started. We do still have some seats up in the front, so we're a little crowded tonight. Squish together, make friends. If you haven't yet picked up your pre-ordered book, if you'd like to buy books, you can do that at the checkout at the end of the event. You can go see my friend Jason over there. Thank you for your support and for buying books with us. It is very exciting to have not one, not two, but three fantastic horror authors with us tonight, whom I will now introduce. Paul Tremblay has won the Bram Stoker, British Fantasy, and Massachusetts Book Awards and is the author of Horror Movie, The Pallbearers Club, Survivor Song, Growing Things, The Cabin at the End of the World, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, and the crime novels The Little Sleep and No Sleep Till Wonderland. He has a master's degree in mathematics, fun fact, and lives outside Boston with his family. Christopher Golden is the New York Times best-selling Bram Stoker award-winning author of such novels as Road of Bones, Ararat, Snowblind, Of Saints and Shadows, and Red Hands. His original novels have been published in more than 15 languages and countries around the world. And finally, the author of the evening, Eric Larocca, is a two-time Bram Stoker Award finalist and Splatterpunk Award winner. Named by Esquire as one of the writers shaping horror's next golden age, and praised by Locus as one of the strongest and most unique voices in contemporary horror fiction. Larocca's notable works include Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, Everything the Darkness Eats, The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, and You've Lost a Lot of Blood. Tonight we are here to celebrate the launch of Eric's latest novel, At Dark, I Become Loathsome. Quote, "If you're reading this, you've likely thought that the world would be a better place without you," end quote. A single line of text glowing in the darkness of the internet, written by Ashley Luton, who has often thought the same, and worse, in the years since his wife died and his young son disappeared. But the peace of the grave is not for him. It's for those he can help. Ashley has constructed a peculiar ritual for those who desire to die, for those whose desire to die is at war with their yearning to live a better life. Struggling to overcome his own endless grief, one night Ashley finds connection with Jinx, a potential candidate for Ashley's next ritual, who spins a tale both revolting and fascinating. Thus begins a relationship that traps the two men in an ever-tightening spiral of painful revelations, where long-hidden secrets are dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. And now, without any further ado, I will hand the stage over to Eric Larocca, Christopher Golden, and Paul Tremblay.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, thanks for coming, everybody. All right, so Chris and I, we're going to get feedback, and we're going to pepper Eric with questions, essentially. And then, at the end of it, you all will be able to pepper him with questions. But you have like a giveaway, or you want to save that for the end?
No,
too?
I think they already did that.
Oh, they already did that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All right. I
yeah.
thought you were going to pick someone.
Yeah.
We're gonna give something else away.
Yeah.
Bury someone alive.
I'll just start with maybe the obvious question. I think it's obvious. Whenever I read a new book, is like, what was the kernel? Do you remember? Like, was there like a what if, or a central component, or a scene that started this novel for you?
Yeah, I mean, this book in particular is really centered around this like makeshift death ritual that Ashley has constructed to help people who feel like they've lost everything and kind of bring them back into like thinking that life is like a wonderful thing again. So this makeshift death ritual, I actually read a little bit in this, I can't remember if it was like ID or Vice, but there was this organization in, I want to say like Thailand, somewhere in Asia, that did something similar to this. And I thought that was like really fascinating, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna put that away for like another concept. And oh, sorry, thank you. And yeah, and it's interesting because I was thinking about this while I was coming here. There's actually a reference to this book in Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. There's a moment when one of the characters mentions how she's watching a news program about like a makeshift death ritual in like Thailand or something. And I had written that prior to writing this book, but I was always like fascinated with that like practice. And that's kind of like the kernel of this project. And then it really all really began when Norman Reedus's agent reached out to me, which was like such a surreal moment. I was like, yeah, right, like, okay, Norman Reedus's agent, sure. And he wrote, like, his agent wrote to me and was like, you know, Norman's like a really big fan of your work and would love to like talk with you about commissioning something for his imprint at Blackstone, which became this. And I had this concept kind of already marinating, and yeah, it just seemed like a really like perfect way of just like stepping into that world and like working with Norman, and especially like I feel like Norman would be like the perfect Ashley for this book. Like I feel like he has that like sensitivity, but also that like brutality that's just like, I don't know, there's something captivating about him. So
There's something about his look, and I mean this, it sounds, he always looks like somebody hurt him.
yeah.
You know, and I mean that both physically and emotionally, right? He's just got this sort of fragility, despite the fact that he's clearly a kick-ass, you know, character
Yeah.
in you know, on screen.
He looks like he's been traumatized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does, which makes him perfect for almost any role in a narrative.
Yeah,
story.
pretty much. Pretty much.
So well, I'm sure Paul's gonna get back to the book, but I wanna actually ask you a question that's gonna make you supremely uncomfortable, but
Great.
it seems only fair since you specialize in making all of us supremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like such a short time since I first met you. Paul was actually there. I don't know if you guys had met prior to that.
We had.
Yeah.
We were in
No, we
Bracken's
had.
backyard. Yeah.
That was the first time I met, I think. Yeah.
And it's happened so fast for you.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you could talk about that experience and what that feels like, because I know probably some of the people here are writers, and it's an interesting experience. And so how you seem to be handling the eruption, for lack of a better word, with great grace. So talk about that a little bit.
I appreciate that, because there are days when I don't feel like I'm at my best self. I'm really working on trying to be mindful of like being in the moment and appreciating everything, and not comparing myself too much to other people, because that's like the biggest way to fail, I feel like, is when you compare yourself to others. It's been a lot. Like, I mean, Things Have Gotten Worse came out in 2021, like during the pandemic, and it felt so surreal to have that level of like attention on me in such a weird way, with like this parasocial like internet culture that we've kind of developed. Yeah, it's been difficult at times, but it's also been so rewarding. I mean, to be here and like look out and see all these like beautiful faces staring back at me is just so amazing. Like all these people that are into like transgressive queer horror, like that's so special. Like I never thought I would have a community like this behind me, and I wanted this for so long. Like I really yearned for a community, because like I grew up in a very small town in Kent, Connecticut, which was like, you know, farm country, like cows, like we wait for cows to cross the road, like it's just very rural, and like there aren't a lot of queer people there, and I felt
Cows, though.
a lot of cows, but like no queer people. And you know, I felt so othered. Like I felt very much like just different, and I feel like people knew things about me before I even like opened my mouth. You know, just being queer, I feel like people like are just quick to like pick you apart and kind of like assign you in like a specific role. So that being said, like I, you know, growing up in that small town was very isolating, and it was really difficult. And I'm grateful for my parents for being like so supportive and so wonderful, and like guiding me the way, you know, the best that they could. But I really yearned for like a strong community, and I feel like I found that with horror, and with you know, the people that are like, I mean, like you and Paul, like, you know, that are like my colleagues now. Like, you know, I feel like I've always felt like very welcomed. You know, I've never felt like I was like a burden or that I was, you know, encroaching on something that was like private. It's always been like I felt very just welcomed by everybody in horror, and that to me has been so special. It's been amazing. I mean, to be able to do this for a living and to like write stories and connect with readers is like the best thing on earth.
So I just want to, because listening to you say that, and then I'll shut up for a second, Paul.
Well, I was going to say that you are definitely a burden.
I pride myself on being a burden for you, Paul. That's it. No, I just want to say that I think it's really interesting. You're talking about the experiences that you had and how readers, I guess, I don't want to put words in your mouth, sort of reflect back to you to say, guess what? You know, you've been waiting to have a sense that other people are hearing you,
Yeah.
and are giving you love back. And it's really interesting to me because what I see also is all of these readers, you've been waiting for them, but I think that there are many people who have been waiting for a voice like yours. Because I think that it's been so hard for a writer who is writing queer horror, transgressive horror, to break through into what we would consider mainstream for so long. And I think that it's a testament to you, but also I think a testament to the audience. So
That's so sweet. I really appreciate that. I mean, I grew up like reading, like Clive Barker obviously is a huge influence for me, and Poppy Z. Bright / Billy Martin. So I mean, to be, you know, writing and releasing material alongside, you know, like contemporary queer horror authors like Haley Piper, Gretchen Felker Martin, you know, the list goes on, David Demchuk, like it's so rewarding to be able to do that. And like what you said, like it's like they're reflecting that light back to me. Like that's honestly what it does feel like. It feels like I've been like giving off a certain energy, and like that energy has been like reflected back to me.
I don't know why I'm laughing, because I was going to ask sort of a smart-ass question, but I want to continue, I mean, because it is going to be a little bit smart-ass. Not on you. Because, I mean, what I really admire about your fiction is that it pulls no punches, you know, and it's transgressive, and it's difficult. It's difficult to sort of to look and feel those emotions. But that's what also gets me so excited about your work, because it does challenge me on so many different levels. So, like, I feel like in horror, there's been a lot of conversations, you know, like, or like talking about horror with heart, you know, versus transgressive fiction, and you know, I'm not here to crap on what other people like purposefully. No, I'm not. So again, like, I'm going to kind of ask a little bit more about transgressive fiction, what it sort of means to you, you know, as opposed to, because I think it would be a lot, I don't want to say easier to go like the horror with the heart way, because I feel like more normies, more mainstream people, you know, you're not gonna have an editor necessarily recoil horror. Like, yeah, here's a horror story where, you know, the people that we like survive and are safe.
Right.
Whereas, you know, that isn't happening in your books. But I feel a sense of, I get a weird sense of hope and optimism when I'm finished with your stuff, because I got to go through it with your characters, if that makes sense.
I feel like that's
so I don't know if I have a question, but it's really just something for you to react to.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's so true, because like horror in and of itself is so cathartic to go through like the worst moments possible in a character's journey and come out on the other side, and maybe they survive, maybe they don't. But it's like hugely cathartic. I mean, Haley Piper says this all the time in interviews, but like horror is like the genre of honesty. It's such an honest genre because it forces you to just like stare unblinkingly at the carnage and the brutality and all of the wickedness in the world. And I think that there's something alluring about that, to me at least. Like I prefer to encounter fiction that is really dark and bleak and challenging, and it honestly makes me feel a lot better about my own situation, my own life or circumstances. So I think horror, like transgressive horror, I feel like it can be hugely cathartic, and I feel like it can be really transformative in a lot of ways. Like if you kind of just like let yourself, if you open up to it and really sit with it for a while and let it kind of like settle into you.
I just want to pick up on that idea of horror being so honest. You know, I mean, in many ways, I'm sort of the normie horror writer that we're talking about in the sense of the kinds. I mean, my books don't have happy endings, but I do try to give. I do try to give a certain satisfaction at the end, as opposed to the sort of transgressive stories that don't allow you any feeling of safety at all.
Right.
Which I think is great. But at the same time, I quote a lot from, there's a band called Over the Rhine, and there's a song by them called All My Favorite People Are Broken. And I think of that when I read your stuff, and I've quoted that song, and I love it because it's true of me in real life, and it's also true of me in fiction. And I do think, again, I'm talking about my opinion rather than asking a question, but I do think that there's something incredibly reassuring about writing about broken people and reading about broken people, because 99%, as my friend Steve's older brother told him about masturbation when he was 12 years old, 99% of people are broken and the other 1% lie.
Right. Yeah.
And at least to a certain degree. And so I think that, are you conscious of helping other people through their issues as well, as you're like dealing with your own sort of feelings that you're putting into the story?
I mean, I look at it like a purge when I'm creating. Like it's really, it's almost like an exorcism when I'm creating something like a novel or even like a novella or short story. I'm not thinking specifically about my audience in particular. I mean, there are times when I do think of like, how will this land with certain readers, and there were actually some elements in this book that we actually had to cut because they were so graphic. So, maybe there will be like a later edition that has like all of those excise scenes intact. But, when I am forced to think about how readers respond to my fiction, I do want them to have like an intense reaction no matter what.
It hurts.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I'm the only one, but when I'm reading your stuff, it hurts to read. Thank you. Only the horror guys. Your stuff hurts to read. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, well, why don't we pivot somewhat back to the book without, spoiling anything. And we were talking about that. So how about, because you've done this in some other stories too, but within this novel, there are two almost like standalone that could be like short stories on their own. I mean, the story connects to it. So I'm curious as to what sort of draws you to that. If also, like when you were writing the book, had you in your head, did you have a plan like, oh, I had these two stories I want to fit in? Or is it just sort of happened while you were telling?
It kind of happened pretty organically. I mean, I love any sort of fiction that like nests narratives inside larger narratives. Like I've done that a couple times in other pieces. But this book, it felt really natural to kind of thread these other like nested stories inside the larger narrative. I'm really interested in like mixed media and like telling stories in different formats, like chat logs and like letters, diaries, entries. I know you do that quite a bit too. Like it just, for me, it feels almost like a little forbidden. It feels like you're reading something that you're not supposed to. And that to me is just like really exciting as someone who loves like transgressive fiction. I love the idea of like being a voyeur and reading something that just feels like off limits. So I really wanted to like incorporate that in this book, and I wanted to create these like nested narratives that felt like they could be standalone pieces, but they do work in tandem with the larger narrative. But yeah, I mean, the two stories that are like nested within this larger story structure, they were written obviously specifically for this book. You know, the book is very much obsessed with like death and like sexuality and fetishes and cancer, like all of those like really dark subjects. So I really wanted these like nested narratives to reflect what Ashley, the main character, was experiencing throughout like the course of the book, and reflect like what he was dealing with and how he was grappling with, you know, poorly grappling with his losses and the trauma that he underwent.
We're just taking turns here.
Yeah.
You mentioned Clive Barker, obviously, and Clive was a huge influence on me in allowing me to imagine things that were new for me. And I wonder, obviously people, but any time there's a queer horror author out right now who is gaining traction, and particularly writing transgressive fiction, Clive's name is the name that comes up most as the sort of trailblazer. What else would you point to as the things that led to you writing these kinds of stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously Clive Barker was a major influence, but I mean, for this story in particular, like I was very fascinated by the work of like J.G. Ballard. So like Crash is a huge influence, especially for one section of one of the nested narratives in the story is very much like my version of Crash. I love that book. And I would say like Kathy Koja is another one. I love Kathy Koja. Skin is a really amazing book. The Cipher, obviously. Michael McDowell is another one. I read a lot of Michael McDowell, and he was an openly queer horror author. He wrote like The Elementals and The Amulet. I think Dennis Cooper, another huge influence for me. He wrote like Frisk and The Sluts.
I'm not familiar.
Oh, Dennis Cooper's amazing.
Okay.
He kind of gets more labeled as like literary fiction as opposed to outright horror. But his novel Frisk is absolutely a horror novel, and The Sluts is too. It's really disturbing. So yeah, so I highly recommend Dennis Cooper. But I mean, like there are so many contemporary horror authors that are also doing like such amazing work. Like, you know, I mentioned like Gretchen Felker Martin. She writes amazing queer fiction. Haley Piper, Joe Koch, David Demchuk. I mean, there's so many like openly queer authors now that are like, you know, blazing new trails and doing stuff that's really out there and exciting.
Tag.
Yeah, I know, really.
All right.
I feel like we should have, you know, when you're playing chess and you hit the thing.
All right, so I'm gonna ask a question about the book, and you get to answer this in whatever way you want. That doesn't spoil that you don't want. But you know, you mentioned, you know, Ashley is selling, or the back of the book mentions he's selling some sort of death experience.
Yeah.
What would Ashley say, or you could say it too? What are his clients purchasing ultimately?
Definitely rebirth, like a transformation. You know, he's so broken and so like poorly coping with the losses that he's experienced and the trauma that he's endured. And he thinks that like organizing these makeshift death rituals will help people. But in a way, he's like fingering the wound over and over again with these rituals. But he's really hoping that, you know, this will be like a rebirth or like some sort of like otherworldly transformation, I could say, more than anything else.
How much is he charging? I forget.
Undisclosed.
Undisclosed. You know, whatever you can afford.
That was kind of quick, so I'm gonna do one more. do you want to talk about Ashley a little bit, like just in general? Again, there's like some really fun, horror fun surprises in this book. So I don't want to like talk about them openly, but.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley in general, like, I mean, I sort of created this character really with like Norman Reedus in mind because he just like, came into the situation and was just like, yeah, I'm a fan, like I'd love to work with you on something. And but Ashley to me, I feel like a lot of pity for Ashley, and I never want the book to feel like I'm looking down on him in any way. Ashley to me feels like a very sad, like pitiful person, and I feel like a lot of empathy for him. I feel like, I mentioned like growing up in a very small rural town in Connecticut, like that kind of informed my view and my experience being queer, and that's kind of like his own, like that's how he kind of views his own queerness, is just being in this very small, isolated town. He's an interesting character. I feel like it was like very cathartic. We were talking about cathartic, horror being really cathartic earlier. This book was like hugely cathartic to write because a lot of his views and like a lot of his hang-ups like felt very familiar to my own. So it was like difficult to write, but also like liberating in a lot of ways.
I mean, my only real remaining question is, you're talking about how you were reached out to by Norman Reedus's agent, and this is sort of, I guess I have two questions. This is sort of like, you wrote Ashley with Norman in mind. Was there an element of throwing the gauntlet down for him? Just as saying, okay, you asked for an Eric Larocca story.
Yeah.
Here's an Eric Larocca story, Norman, like, what are you gonna do? In other words, like, obviously, we hope he's gonna make the movie and
He's gonna have to get a lot of
and
piercings.
star in it,
Right,
and all of
yeah.
that. And but was there an element of let's see, how
Like testing him.
Yeah.
I didn't know if he was really gonna go for this, to be honest, because I had this idea when I was at Emerson, because I went to Emerson for grad school, and I had this idea for like a screenplay that I wanted to write, and that never came to fruition just because my professor at the college was like, like this concept is really interesting, but it's like a little too bleak and a little too dark. There's like a little bit too much like
Eric's career.
depth focused here. So that being said, I like pivoted to something else. But when Norman came to me with this opportunity, and I kind of looked in my portfolio of like the ideas, the concepts that I had kind of brewing on the back burner, I kept coming back to this one specifically because of Ashley and because I thought he would be phenomenal in that role. But I honestly didn't know if he was going to go for it. And there were a few times, like working with, I don't know if I should even say this, but like working with Blackstone, there were times when I worried that they were gonna take things away from the story that were like structurally important to like censor it. And they didn't do that entirely. They took some stuff away. But there were definitely moments when I was like, did I cross a line? Did I go a little too far with this one? And they like reined me back in. So there are some elements like toward the end of the book that are really like, that I had to kind of like skirt around a little bit. But it's just like when you're collaborating with a publisher, you're not the end all, and you're one of like a whole group of people that are putting this book out, and the book really in a lot of ways like no longer belongs to you. Like it belongs to like the company that is publishing it, and then it eventually just belongs to the world. So it's
And you'll do the limited edition eventually with the
right, yeah.
bookstore.
Yeah, so it's just a matter like coming to terms with that and realizing like this isn't like, don't be so precious about the things, like you're gonna have to kill your darlings eventually, you know?
It might amuse you to know that my very first novel, the editor and the publisher took out a ton of stuff that
Really?
was way over the line.
Really?
Way over the line. We'll have that conversation someday. You'd be surprised at the things that.
When was that?
My first novel came out in 1994. Yeah.
So I heard that happened with Jack Ketchum too, with Off Season. I heard that they excised like quite a bit from.
I'm not sure, but it would surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty.
Has
cool.
that ever happened to you?
No.
No.
Yeah, I've been lucky.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to ask is, following up on the Norman Reedus element, and I was thinking about Clive and the things he went on to do. Are there other things in? I know maybe you don't want to talk about it, but are you interested in making films? Are you interested in all of that? Are you pursuing those things? Because now, with this conversation with Norman, it feels like it's a great opportunity to spread the wings even further.
No, I definitely. I mean, I started writing plays when I was really young. Like that's kind of my entry point into writing fiction. Like I started writing plays first, and I think a lot of my fiction like harkens back to my days like writing for theater, because a lot of my pieces are very like character studies, and they're very like small and condensed and focused on like a specific set of characters. But that being said, like, you know, I would love to work on film and you know, theater especially. I miss doing theater like a lot. I had a play done like in Connecticut a couple years ago at Storyfest, which was really fun. And I miss that like live audience interaction with like, you know, because reading books is so solitary, and I'm not like in the room with my readers when they're reading, thankfully for you guys. Thankfully I'm not like peering over your shoulder while you're reading.
As far as you know.
As far as you know. But it's like really exciting to be in a theater with other people, and you're watching something that is only gonna happen that way that one time.
And you're seeing them react.
And you're seeing them react. Like that to me is just like really exciting. So I would definitely like open up to like theater possibilities and film. Definitely. I mean, I went to school for writing for film and television, so I could definitely see myself like doing that down the road for sure.
All right, maybe I've got a couple of more book-specific questions that I have lightning round, and then we'll go to everybody else. I think this definitely applies to this book, but some of your other work as well. There's almost, so I'm saying, talking about your work as a whole, often there's very little supernatural. Sometimes there's like hints, maybe something a little, you know,
There is
weird
like
happens.
a little hint.
A
in this
little
one,
bit, yeah, but I mean, really, like the most horrific stuff is the things that aren't supernatural.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I guess I'm sort of in a roundabout way asking about, you know, maybe the role of the supernatural, how little it's used here, you know, in particular to this book, or like your feelings on it in general, or.
I'm just like not interested in the supernatural. You know, like to me, there's a place for all types
Absolutely.
of horror.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying like that there isn't. But to me, what is really frightening is two people in a room together just doing horrible things to one another. That is like real horror. You know, it feels like especially appropriate for like the times that we're living in now, with like all of this like fascism and just like awful stuff happening in America, for like marginalized communities. Like there's just so much horror, and it's so palpable, and to me like that's what's really frightening. Like the supernatural just doesn't enter like the equation for me at all.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, you know, I'm just like not afraid of that, but like I'm afraid of other people.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm terrified of like what someone else could do to me or to like a loved one.
Right. No, and it's amazing to see that through line from, your first novella that burst upon the scene. I always forget titles.
Thank God.
Yeah, things right. But yeah, the idea of two people talking. I mean, there's always at some point in your story, two people, either one person's telling the other person this terrible story, or they're doing terrible things to each other. But at the same time, like every book feels different. It's only like if you stand back and sort of notice it. Like,
Assess them.
yeah. I don't know, is that something you just noticed, or you like lean into, or these are my obsessions and it's going to be in there anyway?
These are definitely my obsessions. Like, I think we put like our obsessions and our fetishes into like our work constantly, and I'm not saying that I have these fetishes, but I'm definitely like fetish interested. Like, I don't know if that came out right, but like.
So if you'd like Eric to marry
Boston
you,
Yeah.
form a line.
Yeah. I'm just like fascinated by that
Yeah.
stuff. And I just think like writers, it's just innate in us to put like what we're curious about and what we're obsessed with like in our work. And that to me has just always been, fetishes.
100%. We all know, especially I know there's some other writers out there, like write what you know is terrible advice.
Yeah.
But write your obsessions.
Write
You're
your
gonna
obsessions.
do it anyway.
Yeah.
Is good advice. All right, so why don't we go to the lightning round? So you have to answer that.
Okay.
You'd be like, oh,
Pass.
both. Yeah. Martyrs or Possession? Those are movies, by the way, for those.
Martyrs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't seen Martyrs. Wrong, it's Possession. I'm just kidding. So you have a choice of three here. Lost Souls, The Cipher, and I'm going to add Frisk, because I was going to ask about Cooper.
Frisk. Yeah.
Okay. You can elaborate if you want, but you don't have
Oh,
to.
sorry.
No, you don't.
Those are books, by the
Those
way.
are books, guys. Sorry.
Well,
Dennis Cooper,
he mentioned Lost Souls and Cipher earlier, but both those two books in particular are the epigraphs at the start. But I know you're a big Dennis Cooper fan.
Yeah,
I was gonna
love
ask about
Dennis
it.
Cooper.
Yeah, so what about Frisk? It
It just feels
since it's come up
like
a
it's
couple times.
very like clinical and very sterile, but it's like so. It's just so disturbing and so raw and so like it's so uncomfortable, like that book in general.
Yeah.
It's like one of the few books that really just crept under my skin, and like that doesn't happen very often, to me at least. So Frisk to me was just like a real achievement in a lot of ways, because it just felt like so real and so palpable,
All right, well, you live in Boston now, you're not in the suburbs. What's your favorite, if someone were to say like a Boston book or a Boston movie, like do you have like a favorite or one that just comes to mind?
Oh, Boston book or Boston movie? What the fuck is set here?
Yeah, I know, it's hard to answer a question like that like on the spot, but I believe that was written by.
Why would anyone set something like that?
So much.
I believe.
Oh, okay, sure.
There you go.
All right, how about instead of crapping on something, liking something that other people don't like? Is there a horror, we'll go with a movie. A horror movie that people don't like but you love?
Well, you don't like Midsommar, but I love Midsommar.
Most people, more than half probably like that movie.
Okay.
That's,
I don't know. What do you think is like a niche, like?
Well, I can think of one that Paul loves that I hated.
What is it?
Lake Mungo.
wow.
But no, I don't know. Like, what's one? I mean, one that everybody loved that you really
I'm
didn't
just
like.
gonna go with Midsommar.
I'll tell you. I mean, so you said one that people don't like.
That you love,
Oh,
yeah.
see, that's harder for me.
Yeah,
Because
I was trying not to crap on other people's favorite things.
See, Bracken's not here, otherwise I would talk about how much I hated the lighthouse.
All right, so we've been unable to answer two questions. Hopefully the last one goes well. What is your best horror t-shirt or sweater or sweatshirt thing that you own?
Oh, I own I'm gonna wear it tomorrow at the Strand. I own this like cashmere sweater with Isabella Johnny from Possession on it, like a screen print of her, or like it's like painted on almost. It's so fucking dope. Like, it's so awesome.
I think
But
you just
don't be
proved.
offended that he's saving it for
Yeah,
tomorrow.
right. And also, I'd like to point out the first question was martyrs of possession.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
All right, well, we'll open up to you all for questions. For Eric, the first one's the hardest.
What has the collaborative process between you and Norman looked like, both in terms of him giving you feedback or input for your book, and also if he does make a movie, will you get to give him input on that?
Yeah. So I haven't met Norman yet, but I speak like through his agent like a lot of the time, and he like loved the cover. He loves the book. The collaboration process was more like with Blackstone and like the editors in Blackstone, like in-house. So like there was an editor that I worked with specifically for this book. Her name was Melissa Ansinger. She was brilliant. She was like the senior editor at Tor for many, many years. So that was a really amazing process to work with her. As far as like the film and what will happen with the film adaptation, I'm still not entirely sure. I mean, I would hope that I would have like some say in some of like the process, but with like film and Hollywood, you honestly never know, and it's just like such a, I mean, you know, so like it's just like you don't get like a say sometimes. I'll just be honestly happy if it happens in general. So.
I just like to imagine you standing behind Norman Reedus as he reads your book.
Yeah.
Other hands.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to say like thank you because I write queer horror. Like I grew up in rural North Carolina, and
You get it.
that's like I write queer horror. I've been writing it since I was 11. It saved my life. What I want to ask you is like, how do you deal with putting out something that is a piece of your soul? Because I can tell that from Things Have Gotten Worse and Trees Blue Colors since we led there. That's a piece of your soul, and that's what I write is a piece of my soul. And I'm looking to publish now a short story compilation, and I just don't know how to deal with putting out something and having it no longer belong to me.
That's a really good question, and I still struggle with it. It comes down to when you're an artist and you're an author, if someone doesn't respond or react to the work the way you intended to, the way you intended them to react, like you can't control that. And you really have to like separate yourself from that like ego part of it, where it's like, I want them to feel this type of way when they read it or when they experience it. You know, you kind of have to really just relinquish that control. But I still struggle with that so much. Like I put out books and, you know, they're not always received the way like I want them to be. But like that's like just part of the industry, and that's like part of the way how it works.
Can I ask a tailspin question as well?
Yeah.
How did you, like, with the extreme transgressive horror that you do, right? How did you find a publisher willing to publish that?
That's also a good question. Well, the first book I had published was Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which was through Weird Punk Books. Yes. That is the Titan edition. So what happened was Weird Punk published the first edition of the novella Standalone, and it went viral and was all over like TikTok and YouTube. And Titan came in and was like, we would like to, you know, buy the rights to this and publish it. As far as like finding presses that specifically cater toward like extreme transgressive fiction, it's as easy as just like Googling like extreme horror guidelines, novella guidelines. That's what I used to do. I would just like Google or go on like the Horror Tree, which is a really great resource. They post like all these calls for submissions, and they'll say like in their like guidelines that they're looking for extreme content, or they're looking for queer stories. So definitely look into like the Horror Tree and Google. and then like just keep an idea of like the pulse of like the current landscape of like small indie presses. So like I know Tenebris does some queer like horror, and they do some extreme like surreal stuff. Weird Punk definitely does. Clash Books, they do a lot of extreme. They did like a book with Mary Sangiovanni and Edward Lee recently. So definitely like follow those presses on like Blue Sky, or I mean Twitter if you're still using Twitter. But yeah, like but honestly, like I want to say to you, like do not give up. Like just keep writing and keep creating, and you will find your audience, because they are waiting for you.
You're gonna make me cry. Thank you.
Just to add one thing, doors are open. I mean, doors are open that were never open before, and I don't just mean for previously marginalized or still marginalized voices. I mean in horror in general. We're thanks in large part, I think, to Joe Hill's success and Paul's success and other people who have come along. Publishers are looking at horror as a way for them to make money, a way for them to be successful, viable.
Yeah.
Which was never, for so long, people who loved horror had to be, write horror as fantasy, write horror as a thriller, right? And now we are literally in, I think, the greatest period for horror fiction that has ever been.
Yeah.
And I think we fortunately have a lot of writers who are up to the task of making that sustainable.
Yeah.
Because the last time there was a big, push in horror, I don't think that the talent was there. So I think there are a lot of opportunities that weren't there before, and thanks to the Substance getting its Academy Award nomination, I think we now are going to see a lot of doors opening in film for financing, which weren't there before. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, film is definitely helped too. I mean, I think, it's, that Get Out happened right around that 2015 era. I mean, if you don't mind me saying really quickly, then back to questions, but almost 10 years ago to the day, my agent was pitching a head full of ghosts, and we had some editors interested, and it was like a weekend, and my agent was like, oh, we're gonna try to like get them bidding, and then the Tuesday they all passed. And most of them were like, oh, the sales team says horror, we can't do it. Luckily a few weeks later it ended up selling, but yeah, it's just so different now, thankfully. With the bigs and also with the indies too.
Yeah.
More questions for Eric? We got a few minutes left. Yeah, we got time.
Yes.
So I have a question. When you're developing your novels, for like characters, do you typically have like an idea of like where like your characters are going throughout the story, whether it's a novel or like a series? Do you do like a character bible or something like that to kind of keep you on track of where they are and like who they are?
Yeah. So I mean, going to grad school really like hammered that into me, like outline as much as possible. So I outline everything. I really take like a lot of notes about like characters. For this book in particular, like I have like pages and pages of notes that I wrote prior to even writing it. But yeah, like I'm a big fan, and I wasn't always like a big fan of outlining, especially before like pre-grad school. I would kind of just like write and see what happened, and it was fine. Like I mean, it's different for everybody. Like everybody's path is so unique, specifically to them. But that being said, what works best for me is to just like outline and to write these really like meticulous notes about all of the characters and like the motivation and like the arcs that I want to like produce throughout the course of the narrative. So.
I have an addition to Paul's lightning round. Paul Tremblay or Christopher Nolan?
No. Did I say neither?
Well, wait. I was gonna say,
Right answer.
what's the question? They're like,
Which one do you read more often?
Yeah.
Probably Paul.
that's me.
I send him my books.
Yeah.
Any more questions, especially if they make fun of Chris?
They don't make fun of Chris.
Okay.
But, hi.
Hi.
I'm Sarah. The first thing I want to do is thank you, as a fellow queer horror writer from a small town. I think you showed a lot of us what's possible. And I am wondering, I'm not published, but I have works in progress. There are, I think, a lot of social expectations for writers that can keep the more transgressive elements of our work or our art pushed away.
I know where you're going.
Yeah. I would love to know if, when you were first starting out, or even now, if there are ways or practices that have helped you tap into like things that are really depraved, that are really transgressive, that you want to see on the page, but you may worry were a lot.
I mean, I worry. I wrote a novella recently that I'm hoping my publisher will go for, but I don't know, because it's so like disgusting and so fucked up. But I mean, it's all about like just pushing yourself and just you know, Clive Barker really, not to harp on him so much, but like he really paved the way in a lot of ways. Just the way he created worlds and like opened our collective like, consciousness with like what is possible on the page, like the brutality, like but also like the poeticism, you know. So as far as like going for it, I just say fucking go for it. Like go for like be depraved, and like I'm so uninterested in things that are like sanitized and like not authentic to what like a writer is like really in their heart. So for me, I'm more interested in something that is like raw and vulnerable, and I feel like that will lead you to that sort of transgressive, like erotic, really extreme, aggressive horror, you know.
What was the most transgressive book you read last year?
I read Hog by Samuel R. Delaney. That book was disgusting. Oh my god, but really good. Really good. Yeah,
It's been published last year. It's an older book.
it's a much older book. But I read that last year for the first time, and it was a journey.
Yeah, he's more known as a science fiction writer.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, literary, but also transgressive.
Right.
Yeah.
That novel.
If you haven't heard of Samuel Delaney, he's very well respected, especially in science fiction circles.
Yeah. That book is brutal though. So I don't know if I recommend it for like everybody, but if you want to challenge yourself, I highly recommend it.
Any more questions? We'll end it there. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you
for
all.